Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special edition of National Innovation Systems for Absorptive Capacity. Um, we are very excited to have you on the second Tuesday of February 2025, Tuesday, February 11th, 2025, right? So the program Developing National Innovation Strategy, Policies for Absorptive Capacity, like you know, has been devoted to, ensuring that nations uh, realize, right, and also work on or improve upon whatever they've been doing to develop national innovation strategies, national innovation systems, national innovation frameworks for absorptive capacity. Absorptive capacity there meaning the ability to turn innovation to commercialize it and to scale it, to turn it into economic and social performance. In other words, to ensure that it translates into economic performance and social development, right? So before we do a quick recap of last week, let us quickly say that today's theme would be looking at talent management strategies for national innovation systems, right? Talent management strategies for national innovation system with a focus on gender inclusivity. I repeat, today's theme, today's focus would be on talent management strategies for national innovation systems with a particular intensity, so to say, right, on gender inclusivity, right? And the reason for that, especially the reason for that zooming of the lenses on gender inclusivity is because today happens to be a very special day. Today, February 11, 2025, is not just the International Day of Women and Girls in Science, it is also the 10th anniversary of the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. I mean, that's beautiful, isn't it? Today, Tuesday, February 11, 2025, is the regular International Day of Women and Girls in Science, which holds annually, and it is also the 10th anniversary. It's the 10th year, right, since this began in 2015. Isn't that beautiful? So once again, you're very welcome to this special edition of Developing National Innovation Systems to Absorptive Capacity on Amoge Radio Communications. My name is Tolu Omodara. I am very glad to welcome you, and I am proudly a woman. Wow, beautiful. So I'll be speaking today generally about talent management innovation, talent management strategies for national innovation systems. But of course, I will also be advocating for the need to ensure a deliberate gender inclusivity in this talent management strategy. So let's get to the points, right? So some quick points. The first thing we do, as always, is to do a quick recap of what happened the previous week. Last week, we had a very special guest, Mr. Reginald Bassi, a policy enthusiast and a policy expert, an innovation enthusiast, a technology and innovation enthusiast who was sharing some very powerful thoughts with us on a theme. The theme for last week was the role of policy in developing responsive national innovation systems. I repeat, the role of policy in developing responsive national innovation systems that are not reactive, but are actually responsive, right? And we started by saying last week that there has been a tendency for policy to lag behind technology. Right. In other words, technology happens first, then policy is trying to play catch up, right? That was one of the things we said last week. And we started to say, okay, how can we, ensure that we have policies that anticipate technology and can be ahead of technology as much as possible, right? Because if the policy is anticipating technology, then the policy can be responsive rather than reactive to technology. So that was how we started last year, because even in the most developed of nations, often the policy tends to play catch up with technology. And I remember our guest, Mr. Reginald Bassi, saying that technology policies in nations that have learned from others tends to be more responsive, right? Because they have made those technology policies like living documents. He used those words, living documents that constantly evolve, right? And he also said that the people who craft policy in public service unfortunately tend to have insufficient technology know-how, which I acknowledge, right? I remember saying that, yes, I have read even in the most developed of nations that those who are in Congress, those who are in the Senate tend to have an insufficient understanding, but things can be done about that, right? And this is where the public service, right, the public sector has a role to play to, enhance the knowledge, the support systems they have, and so on and so forth, right? One thing that we also said last week was that without a clear national innovation system that has a focus on economic performance, if we are not careful, we will have a lot of creativity, but we may not have total innovation in terms of optimal economic performance. Of course, you know that this is what we have been advocating for on this program, not just the national innovation systems, but the national innovation systems for absorptive capacity. That is the ability to acquire, assimilate, utilize, and translate knowledge into economic development and social advancement, right? And one question that was, burning in my heart last week was, how can nations, ensure that from this point of vision, from a point of clear vision, right, of what they want to achieve with national innovation systems, how can they begin to craft policies to anticipate technological changes and begin to draft policies that will put them at the forefront of global competitiveness, not just in terms of birthing ideas, but all the way to producing and commercializing innovation? Very, very important, right? How can nations get ahead? How can they become more, visionary and futuristic, which were two words that my guest last week, Mr. Reginald Bassi, used, right? In other words, if you are going to be responsive, right, if you're going to be anticipating innovation, and that way you are thinking, okay, what is it that can give my nation, what is it that I can give our nation some advancement, right, or even the ability to leapfrog, right? So to say, nations that have gone seemingly ahead, what is it that can position my nation? What is it that can position our nation to get to that place of advantage? Then it will be very, very important to draft policies that think of the whole spectrum of innovation. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've said a lot of things already about this need for us to see innovation as a system. I think that was the first episode. By the fourth episode, we began to talk about innovation as coordination. Very, very, very important, right? I think even by the third episode, we were talking about that already, and we spoke further about the coordination imperative of innovation in the fourth episode. These are all on our YouTube channel at Amogate. Very, very important for you to kindly subscribe and catch up of some of these things, right? So that question was burning in my heart, right? How do we craft policies, that I'm sure, remember the theme for last week was developing responsive national innovation systems, right? Developing responsive national innovation policies, beg your pardon. What is the role of policy in developing responsive national innovation systems, right? Policies must be responsive, and that way we also have responsive systems. The policy must anticipate innovation, and how can policy help to ensure that nations are responsive to technological changes, and that way they can stay globally competitive and sometimes, in fact, even lead globally, especially if they are anticipators, right? And my guest, Mr. Reginald Bassi, responded that the ability to craft policy that enables technology begins with a clear-cut vision. And I couldn't agree more, right? It's very foundational. Vision is the beginning of strategy. Everything begins with where are we going? Then we can begin to ask the question of how do we get there, right? He said the absorptive capacity we are looking for, which would include scaling economically to create, advancement in society, would require that the vision is articulated clearly on the direction that the country is going. What kind of country does that nation want to be? So before they begin to think about how technology can enable it, because like he rightly said, technology is an enabler, right? So he said it's very, very important that this vision is based on evidence. Very important that the vision looks at the comparative advantage of the country or other factors that are significant to them and they then use technology for springboard advantage. Really, really important. Like I said, please go to our YouTube page and you will learn more by visiting or even revisiting some of these episodes. Now, one thing I want us to remember is that we are still looking at policy, the role of policy in developing responsive national innovation systems, and we are continuing the conversation today, but now looking specifically at the talent management element of policy. This is extremely important because at the end of the day, people are innovators. Machines are not innovators. People create machines. They've been creating them for decades and centuries, and they will keep creating them. So people are the innovators. So what are the kind of talent management strategies that can help innovation systems, right? Now, the first thing, again, like we always say on this program, and that and that is associated with us in Amogate, is that everything must be done intentionally. When you're talking about policies, now, not to talk about responsive policies. When you're talking about policies and we're talking about strategy, you're not talking about reacting, you're talking about anticipating, you're talking about creating, right? The process of strategizing itself is science because you are creating, you're looking at what has not been done before, right? Especially when it comes to setting a vision. A vision is not set for the past, it's set for the future, right? So you have to say, what exactly is the vision, like Mr. Reginald Bassey was saying last week, right? What is the vision for our nation in terms of innovation? Where do we want to go? How much of our GDP do we want to be driven by science and innovation? How much of our GDP do we want to be contingent upon factors that, for instance, we can control? Because the reality is that if you can create a plan and follow through on it for innovation, you are going to be more in control. You are going to be, anticipating and determining. You are going to be shaping and reshaping global elements rather than waiting and reacting to what other nations are doing, right? So when a nation creates a national innovation strategy and ensures that there are systems to support it, what they would have to do is they will also have to say what are the strategy needs, what are the talent needs to drive the strategy. I repeat, when a nation creates a national innovation strategy, which includes the vision of where do we want to go, what do we want to do with innovation, how much of our GDP do we want to be, determined by science and innovation, how much of jobs do we want to be connected with science and innovation, how much of even the foreign exchange do we want to be determined, foreign earnings, beg your pardon, how much of the foreign earnings of exports do we want to be determined by value chain creation through science and innovation, right? Or value chain expansion through science and innovation. When we begin to ask these significant questions that are about vision, then it's easier, let me use it that way, it's easier to then begin to frame the talent management strategies to drive the innovation. Let me give you a simple example. So let's say that you take a particular nation, for instance, a nation like India, and India says, well, we would want to, we already have talents doing great things in other nations of the world, like the United States. I wonder what will happen if India were to pull their software talents, their software capital, human capital away from Silicon Valley today, beginning from the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, who is of Indian origin. I wonder what will happen to Silicon Valley, which is why even in the midst of the political drama, Elon Musk would still rather not have them touch certain H-1B visa issues that would limit human capital, especially from nations like India. So if India were to say, okay, this is our area of comparative, one of our areas of comparative advantage is that we have quality and quantity of human capital in technology. And so based on that, we want to focus, for instance, on, developing stronger contributions to, I don't just want to use a buzzword. It's easy to say artificial intelligence or generative artificial intelligence, but I don't want to say that. We want to focus our national innovation strategy on more efficient, maybe use that as an example, more efficient artificial intelligence products, right? We saw DeepSeek begin to show us the possibility of that, because right now, cost may be a significant advantage, right? Open innovation has become and will probably keep becoming more of the trend these days than in the days when you had more centralized innovation. Open innovation there meaning, making innovation more available, making it for instance, less costly, and so on and so forth, right? Before the traditional model was that innovation was more manufacturer centric. Now it's more democratized. Innovation was more closed. Now it's more open. And innovation before was all about internal discovery, but now is more about external engagement, right? So this is where the world is in terms of innovation. Innovation is much more open. And for you to still commercialize when innovation is much more open and much more accessible, you may have to have a very deliberate strategy for significantly reduced costs, right? Because you spend a lot of resources funding innovation, and yet the world is saying it has to be more open. So you have to think, how do we still commercialize when innovation is much more open? And so and I'm just giving an example, if India begins to say, well, one way to that may be significant cost reduction, and like I shared 2 weeks ago on this program, DeepSeek has shown that it is possible to bring down costs significantly by more efficient models. So if India begins to say, you know what, our strategy, our national innovation strategy, to optimize the significant quantity and quality of human capital we have in science and technology and software would be cost reduction. That is going to be the key core theme of our national innovation strategy. It will be focused on cost reduction, significant cost reduction that will help us, for instance, profit off numbers, right? Our revenue and profit model for commercialization of innovation would be on driving demand, right? We would harness demand because we have the population, the quality and quantity of human capital to bring down costs significantly and still drive demand or still optimize demand aggressively. Let's imagine that were India's strategy, national innovation strategy. The next question will now be, what kind of talent would we need to synchronize the economics and the what kind of talent would we need to synchronize the economics and the science? I hope you understand where I'm going. Let me explain very quickly, or let me break that down. So many times we've had people who are just scientists, and we've talked a lot about that in the earlier episodes of this program, right? We've talked about the need to blend the town and gown. We've talked about the need to coordinate different dimensions of innovation, right? Because many times those who create are in the university labs, but those who test, those who pilot are in the industry labs, right? And many times those who pilot need to give feedback to those who create. And that's why innovation is a process of creating and recreating, because as they pilot and get feedback from the users of the new inventions, then those in the lab and then begin to modify. But these are still all largely scientists, right? Scientists in terms of how they think. Some, of course, those in the industry think more of economic performance typically than those in the university labs, but they're still largely scientists. Now imagine that a nation decides to deliberately create a mix of skills. I remember sharing, I don't know whether it was on this program or the predecessor program, developing national human capital policies. I remember sharing, for instance, that when I finished what we call the junior secondary school in Nigeria, that's your first 3 years of secondary school or high school, like some nation call it. My counselor, my education counselor said to me, your results are so beautiful, you should go to the sciences. I said, no, I'm interested in arts. And I remember saying that one of the things we should have as a nation in Nigeria, for instance, is we should have policies that compel students to do both sciences and arts all the way to the end of their high school or secondary school. Like, what should have been done to me to guide me then was to say, you should do both, because you have the capability as a girl child, right? You have the capability for sciences and you have the passion for art. And as a matter of fact, I remember saying that if we compel it and make it as appealing to them as possible, there are strategies nations are already exploring, strategies for making science appealing, making science inclusive. what we should be doing in Nigeria is we should be in nations like Nigeria, is to be compelling students to do both science and arts all the way to the end of high school, all the way to the end of the senior secondary school. And like I said, some will naturally have a flair for science, some may not naturally have a flair for science, but for those who don't even seem to have a flair for science, we should now find ways to make science as appealing as possible. And that way, we will have sufficient, or in fact, if you ask me, maybe surplus human capital base for science and technological innovations, because this is the foundation, right? That educational foundation will be required for future innovations. Very, very important. That's what should have been done to me as a child of less than 10 years old at that point. I should have been guided to simply do both. And many other children should be guided to simply do both, right? And the reason why this is important, like I said, is because at the end of the day, after crafting that national innovation strategy, right, you are going to then need to say what are the talent requirements for implementing the strategy. And I'm talking about data, I'm talking about specifics, right? So I was going to give the example of deliberately creating those who think both ways. We don't just want to have people who think science, neither do we just want to have people who think economic performance, right? My colleague, Dr. Titi Ogushono, has a PhD in economics, right? She has, I think, a master's in financial economics. That's her strength, that's her passion. But imagine that based on that national policy that is thinking ahead of talent management needs for innovation, including the need for innovation and coordination, imagine that she did both sciences and economics, which she has the natural ability for. She has the ability to do both sciences and economics, just like I had the ability to do both sciences and arts, right? Imagine that the policy said she would do both. Today, she would be a scientist that can think economically and an economist that can think scientifically. So what then would be happening? That way, it will be easier. The path to the commercialization of innovation would be enhanced for many nations, because instead of having scientists that just think scientifically or economists that think economically, we'll have scientists that are already developing ab initio with an intent for the commercialization of innovation, which is what absorptive capacity is all about. My name is Teotolo Modera. This is Amoge Radio Communications. Today is a very special day. February 11 is the International Day of Women and Girls in Science, and it's also the 10th anniversary of the International Day of Women in Science, right? The International Day for Women and Girls in Science is a day that promotes the achievements, that celebrates the achievements and contribution of women to science, right? And in many nations, this is being celebrated. In Pakistan, for instance, their Prime Minister Muhammad Shahbaz Sharif, I hope I'm pronouncing his name well, in his message on this International Day of Women and Girls in Science, said empowering women and girls in science is a national priority, right? And many other nations have acknowledged it. Unfortunately, according to UNESCO Institute for Statistics, UNESCO is the United Nations Education and Science sub-body, right? According to the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, women constitute less than 30% of the world's research, and in cutting-edge fields like artificial intelligence, the number drops to just 22%. That's not acceptable, right? And this is not going to solve itself. We are going to need deliberate talent management strategies for national innovation that has a focus on gender inclusivity, right? Very, very important. Let me also quickly mention that the theme for this year is closing progress to shape the future. I love this. Cutting progress to shape the future with a sub-theme, the best is yet to come. So we're talking about the past, right? I was talking about, I think about 30 years ago, or even 32 years ago, at that point when I was at the, at the crossroads, so to say, between arts and sciences. That's the past. That's 32 years ago. There's nothing that, in a sense, there is nothing that can be done about that, right? Though, of course, I've later gone on to do offshore wind research. I've later gone on to begin to look at wind energy. I've later gone on to begin to look at how do we develop institutions for emerging areas like green energy, what is the role of institutions in helping nations that are more or less, birthing new things, right? What role has institutions played in nations that have led the way in green energy, like Denmark, right? And I think Netherlands to an extent, and at the emerging stage of their own green energy endeavors, did institutions play a role? And if that's happened, what role did leadership also play in shaping institutions, right? And what can other nations that are just beginning, to, build their own green energy systems, even like the United States, relative to nations like Denmark, what lessons can they learn from the role that institutions played? In other words, what I should probably have done or have been guided to do 32 years ago is what I'm still coming back to. I'm still merging the fields that I'm passionate about with areas like science, right? And this is something I've been looking at for maybe the last 2.5 years or so. So again, this is about the future. The past appears to be gone, like I said, but I love this year's theme. It says charting progress to shape the future because the best is yet to come. What do you think? Right? We need to take, when I say developing talent management strategies for national innovation systems, one of the things we need to do is to get data on the talent requirements for the vision. Everything begins with a vision. We have to set the vision. Nations have to set the vision. Where do we want to be in terms of innovation? How much of our GDP, and this is where economists like Dr. Titila Ogunshola come in, right? What is viable? And not just the GDP, honestly, also the GNI, the gross national income, and also the GDP per capita. Very, 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 very important. I saw some statistics recently that gave me some serious cause for concern, right? The GDP per capita for a nation like the United Kingdom is probably almost 40 times more than that of a nation like Nigeria. Not just the GDP, but also the GDP per capita. And I'll give us those statistics, and maybe you will be motivated like me to say, how can we use science and technology and innovation to close this gap? As of 2023, the United Kingdom had a GDP per capita of about $48,866 US dollars. $48,866. That was the GDP per capita. And guess what the GDP per capita for Nigeria was? As at the last I checked, it was barely $1,621. Can you believe that? $1,621 for the GDP per capita. And this is the same 2023, so I'm comparing likes with likes. It was in 2023, the GDP per capita of the United Kingdom was $48,866, while that of Nigeria was about $1,621. Do you know the meaning of that? So I'm going to leave it to my colleague, Dr. Titila Ogunshola, to do, deeper, excellent work on these kind of issues. And you can check out her previous program on our YouTube channel. She's done a lot of fantastic, incisive analysis of programs like core issues of economic development. But let me just quickly mention one or two things, just so that we understand the impact of these kind of, like I said, for me, worrisome data for nations like Nigeria. So gross domestic product is a measure of the total value of a country's final goods and services. Take note of that word, final goods and services, and it's a key indicator of a country's economic health. The final there shows you that it's not about how much of raw oil is extracted from your nation's ground, but how much of it is processed, which is where science and innovation comes in, right? You have to take it to the optimum ends of the global value chain, right? And that's where value addition comes in. The more value you add to the product, the more you convert your for instance, what you have to process coffee. Ethiopia has the raw natural state of coffee, but the more they add the value to it, the more they will command a premium on it. So without science and innovation, you cannot have a strong GDP, because it's not just a measure of your raw materials, but it's a measure of the total value of your final goods and services. So that is the GDP. Then the GDP per capita, right? The gross domestic product per capita is a measure of the country's average economic output per person, right? And normally it is calculated by dividing a country's gross domestic product by its population, right? So this gets worrisome for me, because if Nigeria has an estimated population, I think, of close to 200 million people, right? We are some will say 223.8 million according to 2023. Some will say, oh, are we sure we have the accurate statistic? Well, at least I would say about 200 million people on an average, whichever way you want to argue it, right? Nigeria has that population of about 200 million people, and the United Kingdom has a population of 68.35 million people. 68.35 people. Nigeria has the population of about 200 million people, or 222 million people, like some will say, while the United Kingdom has the population of 68.35 people, right? And so that means that the United Kingdom or Nigeria is about 3.2 times more in population than the United Kingdom. However, when you look at the value of goods, or final goods produced in the United Kingdom versus that of Nigeria, that's the GDP, the United Kingdom is way ahead, right? Nigeria's gross domestic product in 2023 was $362.8 billion, right? $362.8 billion in 2023. That was the value of the final products, the value of the final goods and services produced in Nigeria. But that of the United Kingdom, you want to guess, it was $3.34 trillion. It wasn't $362 billion like Nigeria. It was like almost, if you ask me, $3.34 trillion is about 10 times that of the United States, even though the population of Nigeria is 3.2 times that of the United Kingdom. So you have, beg your pardon, it's about 10 times that of Nigeria. The GDP of the United Kingdom at $3.34 trillion is about 10 times that of Nigeria, even though Nigeria has 3.2 times the population of the. So as a policy planner in Nigeria, I would be asking myself, why would the GDP of a nation with just about 30% of my population be 10 times more than mine? And what do I need to do to not just close that gap, but actually get ahead of such a nation? Now, that is the GDP. Now, let's come to the GNP that I said was more worrisome for me. So the GNP, remember, the GDP per capita, which is now the measure of a country's average economic output per person, right? Not just the total value of final goods and services, now the measure of the country's average economic output per person. The GNP of the United Kingdom, like I said, is about I think $48,000, about $48,000, if I remember. Yes, $48,866. Why that of Nigeria is about $1,621. Unfortunately, that is even more worrisome than the GDP. So the GDP of the United Kingdom is 10 times more, an average of 10 times more than that of that Nigeria, even though Nigeria has 3.2 times the population of the United Kingdom. But the the GDP per capita, right, the gross domestic product per capita is now 30 times more. And for me, that begins to answer the question of the GDP. Why the GDP of the United Kingdom is 10 times more than that of Nigeria, even though they have just about 30% of our population, right? Because when it comes to the GDP per capita, which is a measure of the country's average economic output per person, the UK has significant advantage. They have 30 times more than our GDP per capita. So in other words, they are doing 30 times more per person than we are doing, even though we are said to be some of the most intelligent people in the world, because we are the ones in these same nations. You will find our doctors, you will find our scientists, you will find our engineers in this same nation. So it's not about the people. There's something about the system that is not enabling the people to, have that optimum economic output per person. And for me, this is what the talent management strategies for national innovation system should be addressing, with a focus, of course, on gender inclusivity. How can we begin to do more with our people? Right? It should be if once you now have that clear vision that, look, we want to, for instance, quintuple our GDP at the minimum in the next 5 years. We want to make sure that we increase our GDP 5 times at the minimum in the next 5 years, which gives us 1 year to achieve at least a 10% growth. I'm just giving an example. We want our GDP to grow by, if this is a clear economic goal, because, the policy has to come before the technology, like we were saying last week. The goal, the vision has to come before the technology. Technology simply enables strategy. Technology is not going to determine strategy, which is why, today's program is building on last week's session, like I said, on developing responsive, not reactive national innovation strategies. And the responsiveness begins with the vision, like we said last week. Once you set those clear economic goals to say, look, we want to ensure that we grow our GDP 50% over the next 5 years, as an example, and at the minimum over the next 10 years, as an example, right? We grow 10 times over the next 10 years, as an example. That means that every year we must be growing our GDP at least 10%. Then the next question will be, what do we want to be the contribution of science and technology and innovation to this GDP? You have to get the current data as well. What is the current contribution of innovation to our GDP? Because you can control the lot. You can't control the oil prices. You can't control wars in Ukraine. You can't control all those factors that can mess around with your predictable income, so to say. But a lot of control is in the realm of innovation. With innovation, you can create demand. With innovation, you can determine markets. With innovation, you can even reshape the markets, right? So you have to then take charge of what you can control. It's significant, much more significant. And next week, I'm going to come back to us with data on what is the current contribution of science and innovation to GDPs, right? Especially, again, taking the example of Nigeria and saying what is doing the comparative analysis to say, okay, what is the current contribution of science and technology to other GDPs, right? To also look at a nation like maybe India, what is the current contribution of science and technology to their GDP? And once you know where you are, what the current situation is you can then begin to set a clear path, a clear vision for where you want to be, right? To grow our GDP 10 times over the next 10 years, and at least by 50% over the next 5 years, which means we are growing our GDP 10% every year. This is the deliberate and intentional goal we want to set as far as the contribution of innovation, right, up to the commercialization, not just the creativity like we've been saying, but not just the inventions, but all the way to the commercialization of innovation, scaling and all that. This is a contribution that innovation must make to that GDP growth. And of course, you now come down to the GDP per capita too. How do we close the GDP per capita gap, right? How do we want to make sure that at least in the next 15 years, our GDP per capita has grown 15 times compared to what it is today, right? So, okay, if you want to set this goal again, what kind of skills do we need? What are the talent needs that we have in very specific terms? Then, based on the skills that we need, what is the gap analysis, right? We need to get data on the talent requirements for the vision, right? What are the skills, what are the competencies we require to ensure that science and innovation can actually make that contribution the target percentage of contribution to the GDP growth we have set, right? And then how can we close the gap, right? What are the skills we need? What are the skills we currently have compared with the skills we need? And how do we, close the gap? We must have a DIRA. I called it a DIRA, right? A DIRA plan. One, we must develop the talent management strategy that we need to close the gap between the talent requirements for the innovation contribution to GDP and GDP per capita growth, right? We must develop that plan with having had the data in terms of the competency skills, the competencies and skills required versus the competencies and skills we currently have. There must be a current situational analysis. There must be a clear evidence-based numerical, both quantitative and qualitative data in terms of the talent we need versus the talent we have, and then say, okay, we need to develop a plan to close that gap. Of course, we need to implement the plan periodic in phases, right? And then based on that, we need to review the plan periodically and adapt the plan responsibly. A DIRA plan was developed, we must implement, we must review, and we must adapt a talent management strategy for those national innovation goals, of course, with a focus on gender inclusivity. It is very, very important. Don't forget, this is developing national innovation systems for absorptive capacity, right? And we are beginning to zoom in more and more on the absorptive capacity, the economic performance, right? We've talked a lot about innovation, we've talked about town and gown, we've talked about creation and those other things. Now we have to begin to look at the economic performance, the economic and social development that we need innovation to translate into, right? How do we set those clear goals, and how do we ensure that when I say clear goals, the clear goals of the contribution we want to see national innovation making to national GDP, to national GDP per capita. We need to have a clear strategy for how we, develop talent to fill those gaps, to close the gap between where we are and where we want to be in terms of the contribution of innovation, of science, technology, and innovation to our GDP. We need to say how we or determine, how we want to close those talent gaps between the talent gaps that we need to attain the targets we have set for the contribution of science and innovation to GDP and GDP per capita. We need to close the gap between the talent we need to attain that and the talent we currently have, right? And to close that gap, of course, we need to get data on current situation. Then we need to develop, implement, review, and adapt a plan for closing the gap. Well, I think this is where I'm going to draw a curtain on today's edition of the program, again, with a shout out to women who have made significant contributions as the world celebrates the International Day of Women and Girls in Science, which is very important, very significant for us on this program. And the world celebrates the 10th anniversary of this as well. We need to give a shout out to women who have contributed to science, women like Jane Goodall. Jane Goodall is said to be the foremost expert of chimpanzee after studying the social and family interactions of wild chimpanzees for 6 decades, like 60 whole solid years. There are also women like Alice Augusta Paul. She was an American chemist who developed the Ball method for making ethyl ester derivatives of the Shalmugra oil, which was used as a treatment for leprosy during the early 20th century. That's Alice Ball. We need to give shout out to women like Barbara McClintock. She was born in June, my birth month. She was born on June 16, 1902, and she died on September 2, 1992. She was an American scientist and cytogeneticist who was awarded the 1983 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. I really love that, right? The Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. These are women who have contributed significantly and in inspiring, more women, more girls, today's girls, and tomorrow's women to contribute their part to, talent for national innovation advantage, national innovation competitive advantage. We need to share more stories of these kind of women who have done a lot to contribute to science and technology over the years, innovation, and to let them know that it is possible. As I close today, I want to share with you one of the most powerful things that we can do for tomorrow. One of the most powerful things we can do for tomorrow is to envision tomorrow, because by envisioning tomorrow, it is easier to create that path to shaping tomorrow, like this year's theme for International Day of Women and Girls in Science suggests. We have to chart the progress. The theme again is charting progress to shape the future, because the best is yet to come. Thank you very much for listening to me, for being with us on today's edition of the program. We'll be back same time, same station next week. Until then, remember, we are here to help nations, institutions, organizations develop plans, review their current situation, implement plans. We're very strong on implementation. We can help you to create frameworks. I just shared a quick one, DIRA, and we can break this down. We've done this for organizations, how do we call it now? Do we call it supranational organizations, nations like the German development agencies that work across nations? We've done this for intra-continental agencies like the Economic Community of West African States. Of course, we've done this for private sector organizations, for institutions like the justice sector, and so on and so forth. We're here to support you to articulate this policy, to articulate the strategies. We're here to help you create execution plans, to support you in implementation, and to also build your own internal capacity, because we do not just work for you in Amogate, we work with you, work every step of the way with you to ensure that by the time we finish the work, we have also transferred skills and competencies very deliberately. You can check out our history. This is what we always do. We are very passionate and intentional about transferring skills in the course of working with you. Our website is www.theamogate.org. You can reach us on contact@theamogate.org. My other colleagues will be here all the way through the rest of the week. We are here from Monday to Saturday, every day at 11 a.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. West African time, sharing all kinds of things from the depth and the breadth of knowledge that we have gained, not just from conceptualizing, but also from implementing and reinventing. Well, again, happy International Day of Women and Girls in Science. And next week, I look forward to continuing these conversations on talent management strategies for national innovation systems. Until then, stay innovative and continue to think talent and celebrate women in science and innovation. Have a good one.